my lunch at work. I just want to say this. You can't make your baby daddy take care of your kids. If that nigga want to be there for them kids, that's a good thing. Let the nigga be there for them kids. But if that nigga ain't there for them kids,
of a manhunt underway tonight for a Milwaukee homicide suspect. He's accused of killing a mother of 4 following a domestic dispute that happened last week.
Situation attempting to leave an unhealthy relationship when she was shot and killed. And tonight, police here in Milwaukee are looking for the man who fired that fatal shot.
Literally shot and murdered my daughter, and he's walking free as me and you. And she's no longer with us.
How does a man shoot a woman in front of a witness, get charged with murder, and still walk free? This is the story of Sharon Miller, a 31-year-old single mom of 4, gunned down in her Milwaukee apartment by her boyfriend, a man who was already married. And while her children are left to grow up without their mother, the man accused of killing her lives like nothing ever happened. Her mother, Jacqueline Brinson, has been screaming for justice for over 3 years. Who literally shot and murdered my daughter, and he's walking free as me and you, and she's no longer with us. So how does a homicide case with an eyewitness just fall apart? What secrets were buried behind the relationship that ended in murder? And what happens when the system meant to protect you does nothing at all? If you've ever wondered how killers can walk free despite witnesses, stay with me. This story might be more common than you think. Welcome to Crazy Dark Files, where we shed light on the darkest true crime stories to help raise awareness and promote safety. By liking this video, sharing, and subscribing to this channel, you're helping raise awareness, spread caution, and maybe even save someone else from the same fate. Don't just scroll past, be the reason someone stays safe. Sharon Miller never saw her 32nd birthday. At 31, she was in the prime of her life, a mother of 4 with a vibrant personality that drew people to her. Those who knew her described someone who lit up rooms with her presence, whose laughter could be heard from across the street, whose devotion to her children was unwavering. She was just an outgoing person, recalled Polly Cobbs, a longtime friend who struggled to speak of Sharon in the past tense. She has beautiful children that are really going to miss her. The pain in Polly's voice reveals more than words ever could. The sudden absence of someone who seemed permanent, essential, irreplaceable. Sharon's children were her world. 4 young lives now navigating childhood without their mother's guidance. 4 birthdays each year where presents might come, but mom's embrace never will. 4 futures forever altered by a single moment of violence. In the aftermath of her death, Sharon's mother, Jacqueline Brinson, would uproot her own life, moving away from Milwaukee to raise these grandchildren, carrying both the weight of her own grief and the responsibility of preserving their mother's memory. Friends described Sharon as someone who worked hard, loved deeply, and faced life's challenges with determination. She wasn't perfect, no one is, but she was genuine. The kind of person who would tell you the truth even when it hurt. The kind of mother who sacrificed her own comforts to provide for her children. The kind of friend who showed up when others disappeared. But somewhere along the way, Sharon's path crossed with Darnell Kimball's, and that intersection would ultimately prove fatal. Their relationship defies simple categorization. Court documents describe them as friends, but the nature of their connection appears more complicated. What we know is that Sharon had been staying at Kimball's residence near 52nd and Locust in Milwaukee. What we know is that this arrangement had recently soured, with Sharon being asked to leave. What we know is that on September 12, 2019, she returned to collect her belongings. What we don't know, what perhaps only Sharon and Kimball truly knew, was the full extent of their relationship. Was there romance? Was there conflict? Was there something Sharon knew about Kimball that made her dangerous to him? These questions hover over the case like shadows, partially illuminated by witness statements, but never fully brought to light. Darnell Kimball was 29 at the time with a troubled history. Court records show previous convictions for armed robbery in 2009 and methamphetamine possession in 2018. As a convicted felon, he was legally prohibited from possessing firearms, a restriction he would allegedly violate with deadly consequences. Whatever drew Sharon into Kimball's orbit, whatever kept her there, whatever prompted her to return that September day, these factors combined to create the circumstances for tragedy. A mother of 4, with everything to live for, would never return home to her children. And the ripples of that moment continue to spread outward, touching lives far beyond that Milwaukee apartment. September 12, 2019. A Thursday like any other in Milwaukee's northwest side. The apartment building near 53rd and Locust stood unremarkable among the neighborhood's aging structures, brick and mortar that had witnessed decades of life's dramas playing out behind its walls. But what would unfold inside apartment 3 that afternoon would transform this ordinary address into a crime scene. Sharon Miller arrived around 3:30 p.m. According to witnesses, she had been staying with Darnell Kimball but had recently been asked to leave. She returned to collect her belongings, a mundane errand that should have marked nothing more than the end of a living arrangement. Instead, it marked the end of her life. The apartment wasn't empty when she arrived. Kimball was there along with another man, a witness who would later become crucial to the case. What began as a tense conversation quickly escalated into something more volatile. "You think you can just put me out like that?" Sharon reportedly said to Kimball. The witness would later tell police that Sharon appeared upset, confrontational. Words were exchanged, voices raised. The atmosphere in the apartment grew heavy with unspoken history between them. Then came the threat that may have sealed Sharon's fate. According to court documents, Sharon told Kimball she was going to go live, a reference to Facebook's live streaming feature, and expose secrets about him. What these secrets entailed remains speculation, but they were evidently significant enough that the mere threat of their public revelation triggered a deadly response. The witness described seeing Kimball retrieve a black handgun from another room. When he returned, the argument had reached its breaking point. Sharon stood her ground, perhaps not believing he would actually pull the trigger, perhaps believing their history together would prevent the unthinkable. She was wrong. The first shot struck Sharon in the chest. The witness would later describe the shock that registered on her face, that moment of terrible realization. But Kimball wasn't finished. As Sharon fell backward, he fired again and again. 3 shots in total, each one eliminating any chance of survival. The witness fled the apartment in terror, later telling investigators he heard additional gunshots as he ran. The medical examiner would eventually confirm this account, documenting a total of 5 gunshot wounds to Sharon's body, 2 to her chest, 1 to her right arm, 1 to her left arm, and 1 to her left leg. Each bullet told its own story of violence. The medical examiner's report, clinical in its language but devastating in its implications, noted that 1 bullet had pierced Sharon's heart, another had torn through her lung. The cause of death was listed as multiple gunshot wounds, a sterile phrase that fails to capture the brutality of her final moments. By the time police arrived, responding to reports of gunfire, Sharon lay motionless on the apartment floor. Emergency medical personnel attempted resuscitation, but the damage was too extensive. She was pronounced dead at the scene, her blood soaking into the carpet of an apartment that was never truly home. Outside, neighbors gathered behind yellow police tape, watching as investigators moved in and out of the building. Some knew Sharon by sight, others had never met her. None could have imagined the violence that had erupted just feet from their own homes. As Sharon's body was removed from the apartment, placed in a medical examiner's vehicle and driven away, Darnell Kimball was nowhere to be found. The gun had disappeared with him. In the chaos following the shooting, he had simply walked away, beginning what would become years of evasion from justice. For Sharon's 4 children waiting at home for a mother who would never return, the true horror was just beginning. Milwaukee Police Department's homicide unit descended on the apartment near 53rd and Locust within minutes of the 911 call. The scene they encountered told a story of sudden, explosive violence. 5 shell casings scattered across the floor, blood spatter patterns on walls and furniture, and Sharon Miller's body, still warm, bearing the catastrophic damage of multiple gunshot wounds. Detectives worked methodically, photographing the scene, collecting ballistic evidence, and canvassing neighbors. Several reported hearing gunshots, sharp cracks that punctuated an otherwise ordinary Thursday afternoon. One neighbor described seeing a man matching Kimball's description hurriedly leaving the building shortly after the shots rang out. But the most damning testimony would come from an unexpected source: Kimball's own mother. In a twist that prosecutors would later consider pivotal to their case, Kimball's mother told investigators that her son had called her shortly after the shooting. According to her statement, Kimball confessed to the killing during this call, telling her, "I shot her, Mom. I shot Sharon." This maternal testimony, a mother forced to choose between protecting her son and telling the truth, added a layer of tragedy to an already devastating case. The witness who had been present during the shooting provided detectives with a detailed account that aligned with physical evidence. He described the argument, Sharon's threat to expose Kimball on Facebook Live, and the retrieval of the weapon. He identified Kimball without hesitation from a photo array. His statement, combined with the mother's testimony and physical evidence, gave investigators confidence they had their killer. 4 days after Sharon's death, the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office filed formal charges against Darnell Kimball, first-degree intentional homicide with use of a dangerous weapon. If convicted, he faced life imprisonment. The criminal complaint laid out what appeared to be an airtight case: eyewitness testimony, a confession to his mother, physical evidence, and a clear motive. "This is as strong a homicide case as they come," remarked one veteran prosecutor not directly involved with the case but familiar with its details. "You have an eyewitness, a confession to a family member, ballistic evidence, and the defendant fleeing the scene? Juries typically convict on far less." A warrant was issued for Kimball's arrest, his description and photo distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout Wisconsin and neighboring states. His information was entered into the National Crime Information Center database, flagging him as armed and dangerous. Milwaukee police assigned a dedicated team to locate him, believing an arrest was imminent. The case file, growing thicker by the day, painted a picture of methodical police work. Investigators had interviewed dozens of witnesses, collected surveillance footage from nearby businesses, analyzed phone records, and monitored social media accounts associated with Kimball. They had done everything by the book. What they couldn't have anticipated was how this seemingly straightforward case would unravel in the months and years ahead. How a man charged with such a brutal crime could remain free for years. How a grieving family would be forced to wait for justice while watching their loved one's killer walk the same streets they did. As Sharon's family planned her funeral, selecting a casket and burial clothes instead of planning her next birthday celebration, they believed at least that justice would be swift. They had no way of knowing that the investigation, which appeared so solid in those early days, would become a years-long nightmare of delays, disappointments, and institutional failures. By early 2020, the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office had assembled what they believed was an ironclad case against Darnell Kimball. The prosecution file contained crime scene photos, ballistics reports, witness statements, and the damning testimony from Kimball's own mother. Assistant District Attorney Grant Hubner, a veteran prosecutor with dozens of homicide convictions to his name, was assigned to bring Sharon Miller's killer to justice. After months of evading authorities, Kimball was finally apprehended in February 2020. His capture brought momentary relief to Sharon's family, the first step in what they believed would be a straightforward path to conviction. A trial date was set for July 2020, and prosecutors began the meticulous process of preparing witnesses, organizing evidence, and crafting the narrative that would convince 12 jurors of Kimball's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. But as the trial date approached, cracks began to appear in the seemingly solid case. The COVID-19 pandemic had thrown the court system into unprecedented chaos. Trials were delayed, hearings conducted virtually, and witnesses became increasingly difficult to locate and secure. For homicide cases like Sharon's, these logistical challenges created dangerous vulnerabilities. "We were trying to maintain contact with witnesses during a global pandemic," explained a court official who requested anonymity. "People were moving, changing phone numbers, losing jobs. The normal challenges of witness management became nearly impossible." As July approached, prosecutors faced a growing problem. The eyewitness to the shooting, their star witness, had become increasingly difficult to reach. Phone calls went unanswered, messages unreturned, home visits revealed an empty apartment. The day before jury selection was scheduled to begin, the prosecution made a devastating discovery. Their key witness had disappeared completely. Without his testimony, the case against Kimball rested primarily on circumstantial evidence and the statement from Kimball's mother, which defense attorneys were prepared to challenge as hearsay. On July 13, 2020, Ada Hubner stood before the judge with a motion that no prosecutor ever wants to file, a request to dismiss the charges without prejudice. The legal phrase "without prejudice" meant charges could be refiled if the witness was located, but the practical reality was devastating. Darnell Kimball, the man accused of shooting Sharon Miller 5 times at point-blank range, would walk out of the courthouse a free man. "The state is not prepared to proceed to trial without this witness," Hubner told the court, his voice tight with frustration. "We have exhausted all reasonable efforts to secure his appearance." The judge had no choice but to grant the motion. The case was dismissed. Kimball was released from custody that afternoon. For Jacqueline Brinson, Sharon's mother, the news was incomprehensible. She had received a call from the victim advocate just hours before, explaining in clinical terms why her daughter's killer would go free. "The ball was dropped for justice for my daughter," Brinson told reporters outside the courthouse, her voice breaking. "He literally shot and murdered my daughter, and he's walking free. Free as me and you, and she's no longer with us." The dismissal revealed troubling gaps in the system designed to protect witnesses and secure justice. Questions mounted. Why wasn't the witness placed in a protection program? Why weren't alternative charges pursued that might have succeeded without the eyewitness? How could a case with such strong initial evidence collapse so completely? In the days following the dismissal, Brinson channeled her grief into activism, contacting local media, organizing community meetings, and demanding answers from officials. Her persistence forced the district attorney's office to publicly acknowledge the failure and promise renewed efforts to locate the missing witness. "I'm not going to let my daughter be forgotten," Brinson vowed. "I'm not going to let the system forget what they did or didn't do." Meanwhile, Darnell Kimball returned to the community, legally innocent in the eyes of the law, despite the charges that had been filed against him. For nearly a year, he lived just miles from where Sharon's children were being raised by their grandmother, a proximity that added another layer of trauma to the family's grief. The case that had once seemed destined for conviction had collapsed completely, leaving behind unanswered questions, institutional finger-pointing, and a family trapped in the purgatory of injustice. But the story of Sharon Miller's case wasn't over. Sometimes, justice delayed is not justice denied, merely justice deferred to a later, unexpected chapter. While Darnell Kimball walked free from the homicide charge, his freedom proved short-lived. In December 2020, just 5 months after the case dismissal, Milwaukee police arrested him on an unrelated charge of felon in possession of a firearm. The irony wasn't lost on Sharon's family. The same prohibition that should have prevented him from having the gun that killed Sharon had finally caught up with him, though for a different weapon entirely. Kimball was convicted on the gun charge in early 2021 and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. For Jacqueline Brinson, this conviction offered cold comfort, not justice for her daughter's murder, but at least temporary assurance that Kimball was off the streets. "It's something, but it's not enough," Brinson told a local reporter after the sentencing. "He's not in prison for killing my daughter. He's in prison for having another gun. The system is punishing him for the wrong crime." Meanwhile, Brinson had made the wrenching decision to relocate from Milwaukee, taking Sharon's 4 children with her. The move was both practical and psychological, a fresh start away from the city where their mother's killer had walked free, away from the apartment building where neighbors still whispered about the shooting, away from classmates who asked insensitive questions about their mother's death. "These babies wake up with nightmares," Brinson explained during a rare interview in 2022. "My oldest grandson, he was old enough to understand what happened. He asks me, 'Grandma, why did they let the man who killed my mom go?' What am I supposed to tell him? That sometimes the system fails, that sometimes killers walk free. He's just a child." The psychological toll on the family manifested in various ways. The youngest child, barely a toddler when Sharon was killed, had no conscious memories of her mother knowing her only through photographs and stories. The older children struggled with anger, depression, and trust issues. Brinson herself was diagnosed with PTSD, the trauma of her daughter's murder compounded by the justice system's failure. As for the homicide case itself, it entered a dormant phase. The file remained open but inactive, now one of dozens of unsolved homicides in a city where gun violence had reached epidemic proportions. Occasional reviews by cold case detectives yielded no new leads. The missing witness remained missing. Sharon's case file gathered digital dust in the department's database. By 2023, public memory of Sharon Miller's murder had faded. Local media had moved on to newer tragedies. Community activists focused on more recent injustices. Even some of Sharon's friends admitted they mentioned her name less frequently, the sharp pain of her loss gradually dulling to a persistent ache. Only Jacqueline Brinson remained steadfast, marking each anniversary of her daughter's death with a small memorial service, sending periodic emails to the district attorney's office asking for updates, and maintaining a Facebook page dedicated to keeping Sharon's memory alive. On what would have been Sharon's 35th birthday, Brinson posted a message that revealed both her enduring grief and unwavering hope. "Justice delayed is not justice denied. I will wait as long as it takes. The truth always finds its way to the light." She couldn't have known how prophetic those words would prove to be. May 17, 2023, began like any other day for Jacqueline Brinson. She woke early, helped her grandchildren prepare for school, and scrolled through her phone during a quiet moment with her coffee. When the call came from the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office, she nearly ignored it. These calls had brought nothing but disappointment for years. But something made her answer. "Ms. Brinson," said the voice on the other end, "we're refiling charges against Darnell Kimball for the murder of your daughter." The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the kitchen floor.
The man accused of killing a woman nearly 4 years ago is charged again. Fox 6's Bill Miston joins us live. Bill, the original case here was dismissed, and my understanding, this all came down to one key witness.
Yeah, a witness who never showed up. That's why Darnell Kimball's homicide trial went out the window several years ago. Right now, prosecutors aren't saying what changed, but the refiling of charges signals that prosecutors are ready to take the case to trial again.
After nearly 4 years of waiting, after countless unanswered emails and phone calls, after being told repeatedly that nothing could proceed without the missing witness, suddenly, inexplicably, the case was alive again. What changed? The official explanation was cryptic. Assistant District Attorney Franz Borghardt, who had taken over the case from the previously assigned prosecutor, would only say that new evidence has come to light that allows us to proceed without the original eyewitness. Court documents filed that day revealed slightly more. Prosecutors had located a new witness who claimed to have information about Kimball's actions immediately after the shooting. But rumors within the legal community suggested more dramatic developments. One source close to the investigation, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed that the original witness had been located living in another state and had agreed to testify. Another suggested that advanced forensic techniques had yielded new evidence from the original crime scene materials. A third theory held that Kimball himself had made incriminating statements to fellow inmates during his incarceration on the gun charge. Whatever the catalyst, the Milwaukee County Circuit Court once again had a case file labeled State of Wisconsin versus Darnell Kimball, with charges of first-degree intentional homicide. Judge David Borowski signed a warrant for Kimball's arrest, though this was largely procedural, as Kimball remained in state prison serving his sentence on the weapons conviction. For Brinson, the news triggered a complex emotional response, cautious hope tempered by the memory of previous disappointment. "I want to believe this time will be different," she told family members. "But I've been here before. I've had my hopes raised before." The refiled charges made headlines in Milwaukee media, though with notably less coverage than the original case had received. "Charges refiled in 2019, Milwaukee homicide," read one understated headline. Few outside Sharon's immediate circle remembered the details of the case or recognized her name, but for those who had followed the case from the beginning, the development raised fascinating questions. What evidence could have emerged after nearly 4 years? Who had come forward, and why now? Had technological advances revealed something previously hidden, or had someone's conscience finally compelled them to speak? The district attorney's office scheduled a preliminary hearing for June 2023, setting in motion a legal process that Sharon's family had once believed would never resume. Brinson made arrangements to return to Milwaukee for the proceedings, steeling herself for the emotional ordeal of once again facing her daughter's alleged killer in court. As news of the refiled charges spread through social media, speculation ran rampant. Internet sleuths who followed true crime cases debated theories about what new evidence might have emerged. Armchair detectives analyzed old news reports looking for clues. Legal experts weighed in on the unusual nature of refiling homicide charges after such a lengthy dismissal. What do you think happened to make prosecutors retry this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, in a state prison cell, Darnell Kimball received official notification that he once again faced murder charges, that the crime he thought he had escaped accountability for had returned to haunt him. The system that had once failed Sharon Miller was being given a second chance to deliver justice. The revival of Sharon Miller's case pulled back the curtain on profound systemic failures that plague urban homicide investigations nationwide. Milwaukee, like many American cities, struggles with a witness cooperation crisis that undermines even the strongest prosecutions. The collapse and resurrection of charges against Darnell Kimball wasn't merely one family's tragedy. It was a stark illustration of justice system dysfunction. Statistics support this grim assessment. A 2022 study found that in major urban centers, nearly 40% of homicide cases with identified suspects failed to result in convictions, primarily due to witness intimidation or non-cooperation. Milwaukee's numbers mirror this trend, with prosecutors declining to file charges in approximately 1/3 of solved homicides due to witness issues. No formal witness protection program exists at the county level in Milwaukee. Instead, witnesses in homicide cases might receive temporary hotel accommodations or limited relocation assistance, measures that fall catastrophically short for someone needing to rebuild their entire life under a new identity. The witness in Sharon's case received no documented protection services before disappearing. "We're asking citizens to risk everything while offering them almost nothing in return," said former prosecutor who now advocates for witness protection reform. "The math doesn't work, and cases like Sharon Miller's are the result. The burden of this broken system falls heaviest on victims' families, who must navigate grief while simultaneously fighting for justice." Jacqueline Brinson's experience making endless phone calls, attending hearings, relocating her family, raising her grandchildren, and maintaining pressure on officials represents an invisible second trauma inflicted by the system. The psychological impact of delayed justice extends beyond individual families to entire communities. When violent crimes go unpunished, neighborhoods experience what sociologists call legal cynicism, a profound distrust in legal institutions that further reduces cooperation with authorities, creating a vicious cycle. Sharon's case also highlights the lethal intersection of domestic disputes and firearms. While not a traditional domestic violence case, her killing occurred within the context of a personal relationship where power, control, and secrets created a volatile situation. When guns enter such scenarios, the risk of fatality increases exponentially. A threat to expose secrets should never be a death sentence, noted Tamara Robinson, director of a Milwaukee domestic violence prevention organization. But when firearms are accessible to individuals with poor impulse control or histories of violence, arguments that might otherwise end in harsh words instead end in homicide. The prevalence of illegal firearms in Milwaukee compounds this problem. Despite his felony status prohibiting gun ownership, Kimball allegedly obtained and used a firearm with ease, then obtained another after the case dismissal, leading to his weapons conviction. As Sharon's case moved toward trial once again, these systemic issues formed the backdrop against which her family's quest for justice played out. Their story represented not just one tragedy, but a window into the broken machinery of a justice system failing those it purports to serve, particularly in communities of color where gun violence claims lives with devastating regularity. Sharon Miller's story transcends the details of one homicide case. It illuminates critical failures in our justice system while offering powerful lessons that could save lives. The collapse and revival of her case wasn't just a legal anomaly, it was a call to action. Effective witness protection isn't a luxury, it's a necessity for functional justice. When witnesses fear for their safety, truth becomes the first casualty. Milwaukee, like many cities, needs comprehensive witness support programs that extend beyond temporary hotel stays to include long-term relocation assistance, financial support, and psychological services. Without these investments, cases will continue to collapse and families like Sharon's will continue to suffer twice. First from losing their loved one, then from watching justice slip away. Communities can play a crucial role in supporting victims' families through their darkest hours. For Jacqueline Brinson, simple acts of solidarity made overwhelming days manageable. Neighbors who watched her grandchildren during court hearings, church members who organized meal trains, friends who helped navigate complex victim compensation paperwork. These community supports aren't just kindnesses. They're essential lifelines when systems fail. Sharon's death also highlights the importance of recognizing warning signs in volatile relationships. While not every dangerous relationship follows the same pattern, certain red flags demand attention. Controlling behaviors, isolation tactics, explosive anger, threats during arguments, and especially access to weapons. The presence of firearms in contentious relationships increases the risk of fatal violence exponentially. What makes Sharon's case particularly heartbreaking is that the threat was to expose secrets on social media, something that happens thousands of times daily without deadly consequences. But when that threat intersects with a person willing to use lethal violence to maintain control, tragedy becomes almost inevitable. As of April 2025, Darnell Kimball awaits trial for the murder of Sharon Miller. After multiple procedural delays, the case is scheduled for jury selection next month, nearly 6 years after Sharon's life was cut short. Kimball has maintained his innocence throughout, though he remains incarcerated on the weapons conviction that ironically may have created the opportunity for justice to be revived in Sharon's case. For Jacqueline Brinson, the renewed prosecution represents cautious hope rather than certainty. "I've learned not to count on anything until it happens," she told supporters at a recent prayer vigil, "but I'll be there every day of that trial." Sharon deserves to have someone standing for her in that courtroom. The 4 children Sharon left behind are growing up, the oldest now a teenager, the youngest entering elementary school. They navigate life's milestones without their mother's guidance, carrying both the weight of her absence and the strength of her memory. Brinson has ensured they know their mother as more than a victim, as the vibrant, loving woman who sang off-key to radio songs, who made pancakes shaped like their initials, who dreamed of someday starting her own business. "These children are Sharon's legacy," Brinson says. "Everything I do to fight for justice, I do for them. They need to see that their mother's life mattered, that the system eventually worked, even if it took too long." Whatever the outcome of the upcoming trial, Sharon Miller's case has already exposed critical flaws in how our justice system handles homicides, particularly those affecting communities of color. Her story has become part of a larger conversation about witness protection, prosecutorial resources, and the human cost of systemic failures. In neighborhoods across Milwaukee, Sharon's name has become synonymous with both tragedy and perseverance. A reminder that justice delayed need not be justice denied if those left behind refuse to let the system forget. From what state are you watching this story unfold? Let us know in the comments and share your thoughts on how we can better support families fighting for justice in your community. If this story moved you, please hit like and subscribe to help us share these important stories. Your engagement helps amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard and brings attention to critical issues in our justice system.